Okay, so hello. This is the From Apprentice to Master panel session, and you can post your questions and comments on the similarly named Discord channel. The idea for this panel came from last year's GamesEd conference as a way of giving a voice to graduates who've experienced games education for themselves. I think we get plenty of perspectives from academics and industry employers at GamesEd, but I think the views of games graduates are in many ways equally, or if not more important. My panel today have all therefore experienced or are about to experience some kind of training in game development. And I think it'll be really interesting to get some of their insights. So I'm Jake Habgood, Director of Education Partnerships at Sumo Digital. And I'm previously a games academic as well at Sheffield Hallam University. But right now at Sumo, I'm working collaboratively with colleagues in other studios to try and develop new apprenticeship standards. And apprenticeships are very much about applied learning. So it struck me that this panel provided the perfect opportunity to discuss the role of applied learning in their career paths. We're fortunate enough to have a really diverse panel representing different levels of experience and seniority within the industry. And I will just begin by asking the panel to briefly introduce themselves. So, Victoria.
Hi, so I studied games design at Sheffield Hallam for 3 years. And during this time, I worked on Bounce Back, and then I took a placement year at TikTok Games, where I worked on Super Frog. And then after I graduated, I moved down to London and I worked as a freelancer for a few mobile games. And then after that, I moved back up to the Midlands and I got a job as a concept artist working on Sea of Thieves. And I did that for 4 years, and then eventually I became a senior concept artist, and now I'm currently working on Everwild.
Cool. Lee, should we come to you next?
Hi, so I graduated with a Master's in Game Software Development from Sheffield Hallam in 2012, which was a 5-year course. As part of my final year, I was part of their internal game studio called Steel Minions, where I was a programmer and also helped develop the Bounce Back game that Victoria mentioned. When I graduated, I became a junior programmer at a mobile games company in Sheffield called Distinctive Developments, and we worked on rugby and ice hockey games. After that, I did a short stint out of games, which I didn't like very much, so I came back into games and then became a programmer at Sumo Digital, where I worked on Disney Infinity, Hitman 2, Crackdown 3, and the recently announced Sackboy: A Big Adventure. And then recently I've also changed and become a senior programmer at a studio in Manchester called Nequinox Studios.
Brilliant, thanks Lee. Should we come to you next, Jordan?
Yeah. So I didn't take the traditional route into the games industry. I got my Bachelor in Computer Science back in 2013 from Coventry University. Then as soon as I finished uni, I got a job in web development. I did that for 2 years, which was pretty cool. Then I moved to a game company in Brighton for 6 months, where I got to work on like some mobile games, but still web based. And at that point, I wanted to sort of get into AAA games development, so working with games consoles and stuff. So then I did Jake's 1-year master's course at Sheffield Hallam University, and now I'm here working at Sumo Digital. I've been here for 1.5 years.
Brilliant, thanks Jordan. And you, Emma?
So I graduated this year from the University of Manchester with a degree in fashion business. But during that final year, I wanted to build up my portfolio, so I started doing some sort of freelance marketing work for local businesses, working on branding and websites. One of those businesses happened to be a technology company who specialised in RPA and cloud services. As a sort of repayment for doing their marketing and branding free of charge, they offered some training in what they did. So I sort of took that and then worked on it in my own time because I found it quite interesting. And I took the little projects that I'd worked on back to them just to show them, just thought they'd be interested. And from that, they were very kind to offer me a junior software development role. So throughout my final year of uni, I worked pretty much full time with them as well, building up my skills in coding and software development. And then as I finished my uni in June this year, I started looking at what different career paths I could take. Obviously, I've got the fashion side, but then also now the coding and development side. So I was looking at jobs, and then that's when I saw the advert for an internship with Sumo Digital, which didn't require you to have the traditional path, but just an aptitude and an ability to get code and program. So I applied for that, and I started last week as an intern.
Brilliant. Fantastic. So, we've got a really interesting panel, all of who have taken very different routes into the games industry, and if you like, have served or are serving their apprenticeships into our industry in different ways. So if we come to you first, Victoria, I mean, I met you first as a first-year undergraduate on Sheffield Hallam's game design degree. But even as a first-year student, you were heavily involved in extracurricular projects in the Steel Minions. And in fact, I think you were still the only ever first-year student who shipped a PlayStation game. That wasn't the only published title you did as an undergraduate, and you, as you say, went on and worked on Super Frog with TikTok Games. So it really feels to me like you served multiple apprenticeships as part of your training. Can you sort of talk us through that journey a bit and what effect it had on your learning as a result?
So I think those experiences really contributed to where I am today. Even though necessarily when I was doing work on Bounce Back and Super Frog, they weren't exactly concept art, and they still provided me with so many skills that I use today in my job, whether that be using 3D for my actual concept artwork, or it being communication skills and knowing how to work well in a company, because I think that's something you probably miss if you're just sort of graduating without having gone through that process. I think even when working with Bounce Back, I guess it wasn't officially in a proper game dev studio. It simulated it in a way where you saw a project through to finish. I think that's massively important. Like, the effort it takes to see something through is huge. So all of those skills were massively helped where I am.
Awesome. But obviously, you are a concept artist now, and a lot of those roles weren't actually concept art. So, was this experience just a way of you finding what it is you really wanted to do, or does it actually help your role, your day-to-day role as a concept artist?
Yeah, I think before I started my little venture, I knew drawing was where I was the most happiest. Even though I enjoyed all other forms of art, that was still massively important. I think going through all of that provided me with a time where I could fully explore and try 3D modeling, try rigging, try all these different areas in game dev. So I could confidently make the choice, yeah, this is kind of like what I really enjoying the most. And that time as well was not a waste or anything. It helped me so much, even in terms of being able to communicate within a team, knowing the broad process of art. I'm able to sort of understand UVing and modeling, and that informs the work that I do.
Fantastic, brilliant. So coming to you next then, Lee. You were on the Uncomp Game Software Development degree and part of that aforementioned programming team on Bounce Back. You shipped a game in your 4th and final year. I mean, how much did shipping that game teach you then, above and beyond the sort of theoretical content of the course?
Absolutely. I think writing robust shippable code is probably one of the hardest things to do as a new grad when you've come from a background of a very modular approach to you kind of you've got your modules and you're doing specific kind of sections of an implementation, for example. Bringing that all together and trying to create an actual shippable product where you're ensuring that everything runs smoothly for the user. You have to handle kind of errors for that user and not just fall over. And I genuinely think that's one of the hardest things. And I feel like coming out of university, with slight exposure to that, I mean, I had to go through Sony technical checklists to be able to release on the PSP. And I mean, anyone that's released a game on that knows how strict they can be. So just having that experience before you've even got your foot in the door almost, I think is hugely valuable to anyone that's kind of trying to employ you. Yeah, and I mean, publishers and console manufacturers are really strict, so any advantage you've got on using that hardware straight out the door is great, I think.
Cool. And I mean, you're a senior programmer now. Do you feel that that experience has enabled you to get into that role more quickly, or was it just about getting your first role within the industry?
I think it was just about, like, giving myself the biggest advantage I could. I mean, I had my degree and I wanted to stand out from everyone else, and not just from that, I wanted to also like learn as best I could and be kind of the most advantageous position going forward. And I think even now, like, I learn from all roles. I learn from juniors, I learn from seniors, and things like that. I think I'm always going to be learning. But yeah, I think it's just about leaving university, being able to stand out and kind of set yourself up for your career in a way.
And I mean, you said you went on to work in a junior position at Distinctive after graduation. Did you feel you were already industry ready at that point, or was that sort of still serving your apprenticeship, as it were? I
think I still sometimes don't feel industry ready when you start in a new game and a new project and you've got a new task at hand to do. Like, there's always research phase. You always feel like out of your depth sometimes. I think it's just about getting whatever advantage you can. But every new challenge is gonna overwhelm for a short period of time until you kind of get to grips with it, really. Yeah,
I think it's a really good point, and one of the key things about the games industry, isn't it? So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I've, like, every single time I started on a new project, I've been doing something that I've not necessarily done on my previous projects that I've worked on, and you immediately feel like, how am I going to even cope with this? I've never necessarily done this before. But that's, again, part of, like, that links back to kind of how I was at university, and I remember picking up like with Bounce Back, we were just handed a PSP dev kit and kind of said, off you go. And being able to, that's the exact same mentality that I use now. Like, you're given some hardware or some software, and it's almost like, we need to achieve this. This is your tools, and off you go. And I guess at university, it taught me to learn to apply myself and learn to do that, really.
Cool. Well, I think that's a good point to bring in Jordan then. So, you did the 1-year MSc in game software development at Hallam. So while you didn't ship a game within the Steel Minions, you still had that experience there of somebody giving you a dev kit and having to kind of master that and get on with it. Now, I don't know to how much extent you're using those sort of low-level hardware skills in your day-to-day job these days, but, to what extent does being able to sort of master something like a dev kit represent a sort of rite of passage in order to get your foot in the door in the games industry?
Well, I think, first off, I'm like flattered you said mastering, because I still haven't mastered the PS4 dev kit. But I think, it's correct. I didn't manage to ship a game whilst I was at Sheffield Hallam, but which would have been really cool. As I mentioned, I did your 1-year course, and within that time, like when I had the dev kit, we had access to the PlayStation partnership program, where they actually give you the hardware and the tools that they use in the industry. And for me as a student at the time, and that's a huge thing, because you get like hands-on experience with the tech they use in studios. Back to the original question. I think it sort of brushes on a much larger scope, or much deeper subject in programming culture in general, called understanding the hardware. So if you take a look at your generation of programmers, like back in the PlayStation 1 days, when you had such tight hardware resources, understanding how that worked was just a part of, just intrinsic to what you were doing. So games were literally there on operating systems. As you fast forward to my generation, that sort of understanding still applies. So if you look at some of the latest engines that you have nowadays, that discipline is still required to get those engines running at fast frame rates, for instance. So I think in my case, it was definitely something that contributed towards me being accepted or given a rite of passage into that community that I'm in now. So if I'm able to have conversations with people that have been around longer than I have about sort of how tech works. And even though I don't actually use those skills on a day-to-day basis, like sort of working engine tech all the time, I think they definitely are very useful.
Yeah, no, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, it sort of leads me to think, you know, to what extent is this idea of joining the community as much a social construct as about being about the technical knowledge itself. So, you know, you'll be able to have that conversation about the hardware, which makes you part of that community, and gets you that additional sort of help in the interview to get that job.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, it definitely gives you that extra help that, you know, you're constantly learning stuff all the time. So even though, you know, that helped me get the job and I was able to have those conversations, you're still like sort of learning from your peers as well. And it's just a constant. You're always an apprentice, really. Even though you're learning stuff, but you're just learning new things every day.
I think that's a recurring theme in this panel already, isn't it? You're always an apprentice. So if we move on to Emma now, so you're just at the very beginning of your games industry apprenticeship, if we can call it that. But you know, you as you were saying, you had a very different kind of path to this point so far. Can you tell us a little bit more about what it is you're doing then at Sumo now as an intern?
So I'm working with 3 other interns on sort of our own little projects. I'm going to be learning the C++ language because that's something I haven't done previously, and neither have the other interns. So starting small, first creating, you know, 2D implementation and then moving on to 3D. And then hopefully at the end of the year, we'll be actually shipping a small game. Cool.
So you know, why you come from a sort of a background of having done as sort of a different kind of degree. What led you to that path? Why, you know, you said that you've discovered this is a passion, something you have a real sort of ability for programming, but why didn't you sort of set out to do that in the first place?
I think it was, you know, influence of teachers and parents saying, you know, they could see I was creative, I could see I was creative, but the only really options given to me were, you know, arts and design, which was something I enjoyed because it used my creative side of my brain, but it was no other options were really open to what could be creative. So then I just followed that path through GCSE level and then uni, and it wasn't until I got sort of thrown into a different way to be creative, which was coding and software development, that I realised that those two were actually linked, and that, you know, you can be creative and also go into tech and go into computers because it is a creative subject. And I don't think you realise until you're thrown into it or have experience of it. I certainly wasn't told that, you know, computing was an option at A level, but it was never suggested to me because no one saw that my skills as a creative would fit into that A level. So I think for me, it wasn't until I experienced it and got hands-on that I realised that my skills would actually link to that quite well.
So having listened to the other panel members then about their kind of path into the industry, you know, does it give you any different perspectives on how to make the most of the kind of next year and the opportunity you have? Yeah,
I think I have to take what's unique to an internship or an apprenticeship, which is the industry experience and the contacts that you get through that, as well as, you know, professionalism and how to work within a studio, which is really unique and something you might not necessarily get through, you know, a university program. And also shipping a game, as Lee obviously said, that was really essential to grasping junior roles and stuff, because it's a unique thing and it's not something everyone gets to do. So it's all the additional things that come along with that.
Okay, brilliant. So coming back to you all then, given the experience that you've had then, and some of you are in senior roles now, and you'll be involved in interviewing prospective graduates who want to join the industry today, how has your experience and the kind of the journey that you've taken affected your expectations on, you know, these new graduates wanting to enter the industry? So if we come to you first, Victoria.
So yeah, I've taken part in quite a lot of interviews, and I think the things that we look for for like the art side is a really good solid portfolio, but not just a portfolio that just sort of ticks the boxes. For concept art specifically, we're looking for new designs. So if it's like, if you've gone through university and you've been given a brief to like, I don't know, design a soldier, we're looking for things that are different, a fresh take, just because there's so much similar things out there now. Like if you go on ArtStation, there's so much good things. We're looking for new, interesting ideas. So I think it's about kind of shifting through a lot of that, because the demand for art jobs is super high. So there's quite a high volume of portfolios that we'll get, but it's about finding that one portfolio that really sticks out.
Cool. And you, Lee?
Yeah, just like a really, like if you're coming out of university, like a really strong portfolio, not just kind of like the course content. The course content is almost like a base level, and I think anything that you can do extra with your course content, like whether you develop, you choose a specific part or an interesting tech concept that you want to develop further. And also, to be honest, a lot of industry at the moment is using like Unity and Unreal Engine, so experience on those is massive at the moment. But yeah, anything like that gives you like that kind of edge over everyone else, not just like your course-mate peers, but even around the country, around the world, that might be applying to these studios that you're trying to apply to. Yeah, like just got to stand out in a way, and generally that's either through portfolio or kind of like a passion to kind of learn and self-drive and things like that. Like if you're taking your own time to do things, that stands out as well.
Awesome. Jordan, so I know you're involved in sort of the intern interview process. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, sort of. I think similar to what Lee was saying, where I would expect maybe a degree or something, but it's not like everything. I think a strong portfolio is definitely then the particular an interest in particular subject area that you're interested in. So like, say for example, if you're programming and you're interested in like volumetric fog or I don't know, AI or something like that, I think having a project that demonstrates that a lot about that particular area, I think that would definitely be something I'd look for. And particularly with the process that we went through with the apprenticeships, I think maybe they probably don't have something like that. So if you don't have like a really cool demo or something, I think demonstrating that you show that you have an interest in wanting to learn more, I think is very important. So even if you get something wrong, but you try and follow up on it and ask about why it's wrong or something like that. So just like passion, really.
Cool. So I won't ask that same question of you, Emma, because you've not been involved in any interviewing yet. But I mean, what we've sort of got there then is a kind of classic games industry answer, which is the portfolios are king, and that they are the really important thing to distinguish you from other candidates. But if I can then be sort of devil's advocate on this and say, well, if we look at the recent UK games industry census, it showed that as an industry, we have a workforce that's biased towards, people from middle-class backgrounds. And in a sense, that's because people from those backgrounds have the support financially, in terms of time, to invest in their portfolios and to get involved, in extracurricular work. So I suppose I'm going to put this question back to you. To what extent does the industry's attitude to portfolio work and extracurricular work perpetuate that problem? And what can the industry do about this? And I'll come to you first, Emma, because I guess you wouldn't be here if we'd set that expectation of you in advance.
Yeah, I'm starting my journey into games now as of last week, so I don't have a portfolio, I don't have any experience, but it's about how do you get that portfolio, how do you get that experience. And I'm going to be coming out of this journey next year with 3 other people that have also shipped the same game, and it's about standing out and how can I progress from that. So I think it's more about looking for the sort of drive and determination, and someone that puts in the extra hours and, you know, makes, you know, things they can show in their spare time, and any spare time that you get, you're working on yourself and working on the things that you've got to show. I don't think it's necessarily about, you know, the quantity you can produce, but it's about showing, you know, I was working full time in this apprenticeship, but then, you know, every evening I was working on my own game, or I was working on this for someone else, or I was working on this software. It's about showing that you're willing to put the time and effort in. Maybe not just about what you've done and what you can show, but the ability that you have to keep going and the drive and determination that you can show, rather than, you know, a selection of work, about what you can show personally in your skills and characteristics.
Okay. So who else would like to answer that? Lee?
I was just going to say, like, kind of, so when I refer to like a portfolio, like generally, if you kind of go in the degree route, I mean, that's an out to show your passion and drive, and generally that's in like terms of content. But like in Emma's route, if you're coming without the kind of degree, like your portfolio can also be your drive and your ambition, and like your push to achieve that knowledge. Like that shows. I mean, I've various times of like been in a company where someone's been recruited purely on something that they did completely unrelated to their degree that they decided to hone in on and really push to achieve. And I think, you know, portfolio is like a loose word. Like it's kind of, it could be a load of stuff you've done while learning at university, or it could ultimately just be kind of the drive and passion that you want to show, and that stands out as well. It absolutely stands out.
Okay, but I mean, you know, if you take your own experience in the studio and, you know, working on Bounce Back, for example, I mean, if you as a student sort of need to work and study at the same time, does it make it much harder to engage in those kinds of projects and do the sort of things that you did? And should we as an industry therefore be more open to, you know, taking on people that don't have that kind of portfolio background?
So I was fortunate enough that I didn't have to work during university, but that meant I could ultimately put in a lot of extra time into Bounce Back. I mean, I was there most days and weekends in my final year for probably 4 hours a day kind of thing, and I absolutely wouldn't have been able to do that if I'd been also, like, you know, having to work. So I was very fortunate in that sense, absolutely.
Victoria, was your experience similar?
Well, with Bounce Back, I was working part-time in a cafe. So that was like, it's hard for sure. Like, even after graduating, I couldn't find the job, and I was having to work on my portfolio at night and work as a waitress during the day. So it is super tough. Like, if you don't have the money to be able to go to university, I would say it's a bit more of a more comfortable route, because you don't have those pressures, right? But that's not to say that you have to take that route. There's someone in my team who didn't go to university and is entirely self-taught, but you can tell in his portfolio that he put the time and effort, and it just stands up against industry. It's just that perhaps that person might not have had the opportunity through university to work on something like Bounce Back or get a connection through placement. It's perhaps you miss out on that experience. But to be honest, if you interview really well and you're showing communication skills, and we can just get a sense that this person can work really well in a team, it doesn't matter too much. So I think as well with Emma, like in your position, you didn't have the portfolio at the get-go, but you probably showed the skills and the drive to become that person that could eventually get to that point. I think a lot of it is weighted to yourself as a person, if you have that drive in you.
Yeah, 100%. Jordan?
Yeah, so my situation was sort of similar to Lee's, where I didn't actually have to work whilst I was at uni. So I think during that time I did the same thing. I just spent any extra time I had just doing extracurricular programming activities, and that I think helped a lot. But for someone not in that situation, I definitely agree it would be like much harder, because you've just got less time to do things like, if it could be anything. You could be married with kids, and have responsibilities as well, not just the job. But I've seen people that have pulled through those situations where they've not got a degree, got family, and then they've shipped their own indie game and stuff. There's loads of those examples like on YouTube where they give like motivational videos of how to do this. But yeah, personally speaking, I've never experienced that, but I think definitely would be much harder. But I think it's still something that's doable.
Cool. Emma, do you want to add anything to that? Did you have to work and study for your degree?
In my final year, I worked full time while finishing my degree. So I understand the process of I was working all day until 5, and then as soon as I clocked out at 5, I'd have my dinner until 5:30, and then work late into the evening on my dissertation and all my final year projects. And I didn't have any time for extracurricular because my time was full, my schedule was full. I didn't have any time to even see friends. So fitting, extracurricular or hobbies or hobby programming into that would have been virtually impossible, which is again why I'm so glad this position that I'm in now didn't ask for portfolio. It just looked for ability and where you could be in the future. Like Victoria said, it's looking for I'm going to build my portfolio from now. I'm going to start from now, but I'm so glad that they look for the sort of what could be rather than what is or what was. So I'm really thankful for that.
Yeah, brilliant. And I guess it's something as an industry we need to be more mindful of going forward. Brilliant. So I think we'll take some questions from the audience now. Somebody's asking, how does an internship work when it's remote? So obviously universities are struggling with personal connections during lockdown. Is that, has that been noticeable in more on-the-job learning? So I guess, Emma, you're probably in a good position to answer this in terms of that personal connection. I mean, we've only met in the real world very briefly once, haven't we?
Yeah.
So otherwise, the team.
Yeah, I think it's in some ways it's good starting a new job remote because you don't have all the worries of like finding the office and you're going to be late in traffic, and meeting everyone in the office can be a bit daunting. But I think we've worked quite well. We've used Teams to its extent and having those daily meetings which are on video so you can see face to face. I feel like I've already met, I have met some of you, but one candidate I've not met in person, but I have met on Teams, and I feel like you can still get a good sort of feel for everyone and everyone's individuals, and we really good at keeping in contact, not just about on the job stuff, but extracurricular stuff like going for tea or where's good. Some people have just moved up to Sheffield, so saying where's good to go out at night or what have you. I think getting those social aspects in as well is a really important part of joining any team. So I think we've managed that quite well with the Teams chat and the daily meetings. I think that's working really well.
Cool. And how's everybody else finding it? I mean, I suppose one of the sort of observations that I hear people say is that if you've got a team that's got that sort of project that's already in motion and everybody knows what they're doing, that actually working remotely has, if anything, sort of been more productive. But if you're starting a new team and having to get to know people from scratch, like we are now with the interns, that's a lot harder, is it? Does that reflect your experiences?
I think like it was weird to get used to. I think when this whole thing started like happening, I think that like everyone's in the same boat. I mean, I know my my kind of work ethic has become more flexible working now, so my day's a lot kind of more varied than it was. It wasn't that I'm in a kind of office 9 to 5. I think like my mindset is shifting a little bit, that I'm starting to think I'd like to do this more, but I don't know if that's just going to be kind of like a FOMO, fear of missing out thing once everyone goes back and I'm the one that's still sat in an office, for example. So I think that's going to be something that I kind of figure out with down the line. But yeah, it's weird that you don't, especially in a game studio that's so lively and loud generally, like it's you miss that vibe. You definitely miss just walking around the office, walking past someone's desk, seeing the game running, seeing people crowd around the desk, and like when like something clicks and the gameplay is great, you kind of just miss that now. So it's all like teams organized. So Yeah, it's weird. There's pros and cons, I think, to both ways at the moment.
Yeah, we had quite a few challenges, and challenges that have developed as well, because I think initially we felt like you sort of suggested, Jake, with like the productivity went up, like quite a lot of people were saying that, but then it has, I think, reached a point where, because we're so heavily reliant on meetings, like we use Teams as well, a lot of people were finding that they were literally in meetings all the time. So you sort of get to a level in management where that is an issue. And I think the other sort of challenge was trying to simulate the casualness of just being in an office, and sort of glancing at your colleague's PC and having some thoughts on what they're doing. So we kind of came up with like having dailies. So you sort of like post your work in progress, and people can like check out and sort of like message you saying, hey, that's really cool, but I have some thoughts on this. So that's been really good. But yeah, I think a lot of people have mixed opinions on it. I think for a lot of people, finding it a bit of a drag now, and they would like to see faces that aren't pixels. I think that's myself. Like I'm quite keen to return part-time. But yeah, I think it totally differs on the person, because some people are loving it and some people are a little bit like,
Excellent.
Yeah, I'm on the other end of the spectrum of that one, because my project that I'm working on is actually like we're like well into it, like nearly close to shipping it. So everybody sort of already knew what they were doing. So the transition from office to working from home was actually quite seamless. So I mean, there are some cases where you're like not as productive because of like technical reasons, like maybe your internet connection cuts out. But I think that's probably like the worst end of it, really.
Cool. So we have another question. So as a graduate with a generalist liberal arts degree, including programming, this is very interesting seeing the different paths, but without any previous game-specific education or substantial portfolio, what sort of route might seem appropriate to this as a starting point? Anybody got any thoughts on that? Or
I was just going to say, I think depending on your like desired technical route, like if it's like the generalist route, pick up kind of one of the game engines that does a lot of the heavy lifting for you. And a lot of the time that the people that I've seen kind of get recruited that have done self-teaching and self-learn kind of things, it's that they've worked on a game. And I think like that's what studios want to see. I think they want to see how you can do that kind of, you know, like I think if it was a technical, like if you was going for a heavily technical role, like Jordan said, really intense technical examples that are really strong. But yeah, like a lot of companies are recruiting generalists, and I think that's a really good way to bulk up your portfolio straight off the bat, kind of getting stuck into some of the engines that are out there and getting developing a game or even just ideas out there.
Anybody else want to chip in on that? Or I suppose just to kind of put my own perspective, you know, a lot of the work that I'm doing and the work that that Emma's involved in is about trying to get the industry together to create new apprenticeship programs. And I think, you know, potentially the apprenticeship route could offer people different routes into the games industry who don't have that kind of portfolio background. And as a result, it then allows the games industry to cast the net wider, to be able to take on, you know, candidates like Emma, who've got a sort of fashion degree, who wouldn't otherwise have been able to get that kind of opportunity, but has, you know, that's shown the core potential. I mean, the interview process that you went through, Emma, was quite rigorous, I think, by any interview process standard, involving 3 weeks of C++ learning. I think, you know, those kind of different pathways and you know, providing the opportunity for people to show their potential could be something for the future and something that might sort of help you. So somebody was asking what level the apprenticeships are. So at the moment we're working on, I mean, let's be clear, the apprenticeship standards don't exist yet. So there aren't apprenticeship standards for the sort of mainstream game development roles, programmers, artists, designers. They don't exist as yet, but we are looking to create a level 7 game programming apprenticeship standard. And we're sort of in the process of doing that. It takes quite a long time, it takes about a year to get an apprenticeship standard through. But I guess, Emma is a good example of the kind of graduate that could come into the scheme at the end of that. Cool. So we've just got sort of 5 minutes to go. I think just to, sum up, I think often we hear a lot of sort of negative things said in the games industry about perhaps games degrees. I was wondering, what your thoughts are. You've been through these courses. How do you feel about game development degrees as a graduate of them and as somebody that sort of has gone into that industry subsequently? Victoria?
So I think it varies depending university or college. I think with Sheffield Hallam, it was kind of finding its footing a little bit, but it was great in a sense that I had room and time and financial support to find where I wanted to be. So if anything, that was super valuable. And it also gave me connections to then go work as a placement or on bounce back. So I think it's do your research because they're super expensive. There are probably courses that are better than others. And if you have a clear idea of where you want to be, say if you were myself back then and you definitely knew concept art was where you wanted to be, there are courses out there that are directly targeted to that, or you can go through the route of more of like a generalist kind of games design or games art. So yeah, I understand the negative misconception now, because when I did them they were way cheaper. Now they've definitely bumped out in price. So I would, with anything in life, do your research before going. And if university just isn't possible, if it's too expensive for you, there are other avenues. Like I'm doing a course right now online. There are things that you can do that aren't university. So don't let that kind of like put you off even starting in this industry because you can't afford it. There are different things you can do.
Cool. Lee, can we come to you then?
Yeah, like to echo Victoria, basically like look at the course content, and I think anything with any university that's got links is a massive kind of a bonus. I mean, I know with Sheffield Hallam, we had a big link with Sony. We were getting PSP dev kits. I think we were some of the only students to ever be working on dev kits back in 2011 when I was there. And I remember looking back, because I did the MComp, so it's 5 years. I remember thinking how I was at the end of my 4th year compared to how I was at the end of my 5th year. And it like they were worlds apart. I think that last year was fundamental in me learning what it takes to work in the games industry, because it is overwhelming sometimes, and like the industry is a hard industry, and there's a huge shortage of engineers, but that's because like I think it's just a really hard industry to kind of break into. But yeah, like, and also I think you have to correct me if I'm wrong here, Jake, but we brought Bounce Back into like that final year. We kind of had modules that were developing that game, and kind of, so we were shipping a game through university almost, and I think that was hugely beneficial for me.
Awesome. Jordan?
Yeah, so it's interesting for me because I've sort of experienced both, like where I've done a traditional computer science degree and a games degree. I think the general conception was like, before I started my degree at all, was I would like, stay away from game degrees because, it's sort of very specific, and just do a computer science degree. But I'd probably disagree with that now after doing my master's, because it's sort of the topics that you cover in my course in particular, and I think probably other game programming courses, sort of general, they can be applied to sort of anything. So I would probably say games degrees are pretty good thing to to do, but don't be like sort of deterred just because it's, you know, games and, oh, that sounds too specific.
Awesome. Brilliant. Well, I think that's, you know, been brilliant, really insightful, and, you know, really great to get lots of different perspectives there. I think, you know, obviously if I had to pull one thing out of our conversation as a theme, then it's that, you know, the games industry is always moving. You know, in many ways, we're all apprentices for our whole careers, and that's probably what makes the games industry so exciting and interesting to work in. But I'd like to thank you, Victoria, Lee, Jordan, and Emma, and that concludes our talk for today. Thank you.